Hello, folks. This is Rebecca Adams, and I have Becky Vermeer with me again, thankfully. Say hello, Becky.
Hello.
Love that
Do you
Mrs.
think we'll ever
Doubtfire.
stop finding that funny?
No, I just love it. I think I'm always going to laugh at that because I love that movie. Mrs. Doubtfire is one of my favorite movies.
Yeah.
So, folks, tonight we're gonna talk a little bit more about the empowering that we did on the last two episodes. I just have some questions for Becky. So we'll see exactly where this takes us. We don't know. We never do. She doesn't know what I'm going to ask her, and I don't know what she's going to say. Believe me.
What do you mean by that?
I never know what's coming out of your mouth.
Half the time I don't either. So we're on the same page at least.
Well, that's good. That's good. I'm sure your sister would probably say the same thing, right?
Well, probably.
Yeah, that's kind of what I figured. Well, I'm going to read your bio for people.
Okay.
Yep. I read it for the first part of the episode on empowering, but I didn't for the part two. So I'm going to read that. Becky Vermeer is the executive director for the Crisis Center of Taney County and has been for the last 25 years. She is responsible for grant writing, fundraising, programming, staff oversight, and community awareness activities. Becky graduated from the College of the Ozarks with a double major in psychology, philosophy, and religion. Becky has served statewide on the board of directors for the Missouri Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence and held the offices of president and vice president for 4 years consecutively. Becky has been asked by multiple statewide associations to present trainings on domestic and sexual violence. Finally, Becky has been qualified by the local court system as a domestic violence expert witness and is called upon to provide testimony for the prosecution in domestic violence cases. I still get tired every time I read that. I don't even get past the first paragraph and I'm already like, okay, let's just lay down and take a nap.
I hear you.
You have
So I'm
plowed
not
through a lot.
smiling at what you said, but what you don't know that's happening in my life right now is I have a puppy that's trying to chew on my toes. So what you don't see behind the camera is a puppy chewing on my toes.
That's too funny. So if you
And
smile at inappropriate moments, that's why, right?
I'm doing a pretty good job maintaining my composure, but
If you all of a sudden begin to laugh uncontrollably, we'll know why.
or jump and say ow, one of those two things that could happen.
Okay. Thanks for the warning. I
Yeah,
appreciate
just a little heads up.
That's too funny. Okay. Let me look at my questions here. Some of these are for a later episode, not tonight. So I've got to sort those through here.
Oh, intriguing.
I know. I've been keeping some questions going for you.
I better start studying for these tests. That's all I know.
Yeah, you need to. You really do. We didn't really get into the advocacy wheel because I was having a hard time pulling that up. So I'm going to avoid that question, which that's going to have to be edited out. That made no sense. Okay. So when in our last episode, you were talking about memory gaps for someone who they've gone through something traumatic and they're not able to retell the story chronologically. And you mentioned, I forget how you worded it, but that anybody who deals with trauma victims knows that. You don't know, first of all, how much that helped me. Because I always thought there was something wrong with me, with my mind and how it worked, that I could not tell something in a chronological order. And does that, first of all, there's more to it than this on my question, but does that mean that I need to go back to my traumatic events and get those process through, and then that will help me be better in the future? Or what does that mean?
I think my answer to that question is the answer is in the resolve and the resolution. And so I say that meaning anybody who's experienced a trauma, whether it's a domestic violence situation or whether it's something different, we develop, let me see the right way to say this. We develop a way to cope with it, whatever that coping mechanism might happen to be. And so like if say there was a horrific car accident, and when the EMTs respond to the scene, they may ask a person what happened, and the person may only recollect something hit me and I went off the side of the road. But then as they begin to be removed from the trauma, the crisis has subsided, and now they're still in that healing process. It may even be weeks later where all of a sudden they have a recollection of, oh, that's what happened first, and now I can put the pieces together. It's when that there's sometimes we check out, for lack of a better term, depending on what the trauma is. Sometimes the trauma is so intense that we check out, but it doesn't mean that it didn't happen. And it doesn't mean that somewhere inside of ourselves we didn't store it. It just means that it's not in the forefront of our minds.
Okay.
I would never suggest to you that you're not a whole person or that you're not healed from the traumas that you've encountered. And so to say that I need to revisit something almost made me feel like you were saying maybe that I haven't healed. And I don't think that's true.
Okay.
I just think that the more intense trauma that we encounter, I think it's harder sometimes to put all those pieces together. You know, we have blackout moments, I guess, for another term that we can throw out there, of right at that moment of, again, we'll use a car accident, right at that moment of impact, I don't know what I was doing. Like it completely went away. Does that mean it will never come back? No. It's possible. I mean, that's the thing though, and that's why I say don't think that you haven't healed because it hasn't come back. It may never come back. It may have just been lost in that whole wheel of trauma that you were involved in. Or at a later date and time, it's even possible that visiting the car accident again, there was a song playing on the radio. And at a later date and time, I hear that song, and all of a sudden that memory comes flooding back. Oh, I forgot about that. But now, because that song put my head in that time and space for just that moment, I was able to recall the incident that took place. I'm always so fascinated with our physical bodies, but I'm even more fascinated with our mental bodies, our emotional bodies, like the things that we're capable of. It just always fascinates me. And so we have that ability inside of ourselves to shut those things off when we need to, but they're still there. And so there's something inside of us that can bring that back to the forefront, if that makes any sense at all. It's just me talking off the top of my head, but the one thing I want to make sure that we address is I don't think for one second that you haven't gone through the healing process.
Okay, because I've had some more, I don't know, since we've talked the last time, and just for the audience, just so you know, we talk off camera before we start, and we just have a really good time just talking and chilling and hanging out on Zoom. And so we've talked, before about some of my issues and some of the things I've gone through, and it's almost like that has unlocked or just barely kind of opened up Pandora's box a little bit more, and then I've been remembering more things, and I've been writing those down too, just because I want to have those just, okay, are you sure you've worked through all of this? And, a forgiveness process, the whole 9 yards, because it's all hard. I don't care how you look at it. It's all hard.
Right. Right.
Well, the one reason that I'm asking you this, I had a traumatic event that happened at work when I was working in Branson. And I just couldn't believe how this all unfolded. And I'm just standing there, and at the time I was not laughing, but to sit back and look at it now, I'm like, I can't believe it got that ridiculous. I mean, security had to get called and everything. It was insane. There was no reason for that. And so then when I needed to recount everything to my manager later, I talk with my hands a lot. I try to really control that when when I'm in front of the camera, but I do use my hands a lot. And my ex-husband used to say, if you didn't have your hands, he said, you wouldn't be able to talk. You'd be mute. But anyway, she started watching my hands. And the way she was doing that, I was already having a hard time saying it chronologically anyway, telling what happened. But then when she started watching my hands, and it's almost in this mockery, kind of a belittling way that she was doing this, and that made me feel even worse. And then I couldn't remember even more. My memory even froze even more, and I didn't even feel like I was being listened to. And it's okay. So then I'm jumping ahead of myself here. So here's my question, which I've already asked you. Was my inability to tell it chronologically a result of unresolved trauma from my past? So you pretty much answered that. Is there anything else you want to say on that?
I think that it could be an indicator. Like, I think that we need to know ourselves well enough to know those kinds of things. And so the fact that you just know yourself well enough to say, could that be an indicator?
Mm-hmm.
Makes me think you're very self-aware. And
Okay.
so if you're inside of yourself, you had the ability to pull that to the forefront of your mind enough to even ask that question, um, it's probably something to pay attention to.
Okay. Because I mean, after 48 years of domestic violence, there's probably a couple extra things hanging around
Certainly.
that, that need to be looked
Right,
into and processed and all of
right.
that good stuff.
Well, and I like to say all of us, regardless of whether we've come out of a trauma experience or not, we all need to be in that position of self-reflection and self-awareness all of the time.
Mhm.
That all of a sudden it's brought to our attention this one thing that we need to pay attention to. Oh, I guess I'm not as evolved as I thought I was or whatever else. Because I think that we're all on a journey somewhere.
Mhm.
We haven't all gotten there yet.
No. Mm-mm.
So nobody's perfect. It kind of falls back to that. Nobody's perfect. And so we all have things. The difference is knowing we all have things, we're not all willing to deal with them.
Mm-hmm.
But the most evolved self-aware people do. And so that's why I say if your body, your mind, your emotions are bringing something to the forefront, I'd pay attention to it
Okay.
and then look into it. And maybe it's just oh yeah, it's a recollection, or maybe it's oh yeah, like I need to resolve that particular thing. And I think that we're completely equipped that way, that we can do that within ourselves if we learn to listen to ourselves.
Yeah.
And in talking before about domestic violence, we've said it how many times that the one thing that the abuser is motivated to do is encourage the victim to stop listening to themselves, to stop trusting that inner voice, to stop listening to their gut. And so it's possible that a lot of those times, because you were told not to listen to your gut and you didn't, doesn't mean even years later that you're in a safe place and all of a sudden it comes back out again. Oh yeah, that's that one thing that I was never allowed to deal with, but now I can.
Mm-hmm. Well, and since you brought that up, that's really interesting because my ex, that's the last thing in the world he would do would be to listen to his body as to what's going on. And even if he did listen, he sure wouldn't hear, and there's a difference between the two. He
Mhm.
wouldn't be alert to that. He wouldn't do anything about it, that kind of thing. And I would have been laughed at had we had anything remotely similar of a conversation like you and I just had just now
Mhm.
in front of the camera. It would have been, what are you talking about? You're nuts. So I had never thought about that the abuser gets the victim to stop listening to their gut.
And I always tell people when we're in that place of self-evaluation, there's three things that could happen. Like I tell people when we're talking about how do you rebuild self-worth, a lot of times I tell people here's a good thing to do. Sit down and make a list. 2 columns. What do I like about me? Fill up that list. What don't I like about me? Fill up that list. So completely continue to adopt and love the things about you that you like about you. So then now you have two choices. The things I don't like about me. I don't like this thing about me. Am I willing to change it? If so, then how will I do that? Or this thing I don't like about me. Am I willing to change it? Nope. You keep it right there. Those are the choices that we have. And so,
Mhm.
then when we talk about at the end of the day, that whole the ability to esteem ourselves from the inside out, when we do that, we need to look at that list. All the things I love about me, that's part of how I esteem myself from the inside out. All the things that I don't like about me, that's also part of it. The things that I don't like about me that I'm willing to change will eventually become the things I like about me. The things that I don't like about me that I'm not willing to change, I just have to love me anyway because I'm not willing to change them.
Mhm.
So even on that, that's not admitting or suggesting for 1 second we're all perfect. We're
Mm-mm.
not. There are some things we're willing to change and there's some things that we're not. So then when it's all said and done, I decide I'm not willing to change it. So guess what? I love that thing about me and it's okay.
Mhm.
And we can make peace with it that way as well. So it just
That's
depends on each individual person and what their preferences of how they want to be. I mean, somebody may say, I don't like that I'm crass. Am I willing to change that? Nope. I want to keep being crass. Well, then you better move that to the other side
Yep.
because it's never going to go away. So instead of saying you don't like it, you might as well embrace it.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. That's good. That's awesome. Okay. It's so fascinating to talk to you. I love it. I always have. It's just it's always been so helpful. I always
Yeah,
walked away having a lot more knowledge and understanding than I did before.
well, I talk to myself all day long. So
Is that why you're so smart?
yeah, I just talk to myself all day. They do say the smarter people do talk to themselves. So
No, I talk to myself.
there
I
you go.
Yeah, I do. And I'll say, girl, that was not smart. Or
Occasionally,
whatever.
I pull out the Rebecca Ann card against myself sometimes. Rebecca Ann.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh. Wow. That's a little scary when you throw in the
I
middle name
know.
in there too.
Especially when it sounds like my mother. But I digress.
You're fine. You're fine. So I wanted to ask you about, you said at the end of an interview with a person that's just come into the shelter, and you ask them, what does empowering mean to you?
Mhm.
And you said that there's no wrong answer for it. Um, Let me read my chicken scratches here. I wrote down, someone who has had little to no freedom, you just gave me permission to fly. Because first of all, you gave me permission to define it, but then you also, you don't judge it like the abuser used to. You allow me that freedom, and the release feels so good, Becky. I can't even put it into words for you, but yet you need to understand it's also scary.
Mhm.
And so there, I know that there's more that I need to unpack on that, but that was so freeing. I keep going back to group. That was my biggest thing, I think, that I took away from my stay at the crisis center, were the group sessions. They were so healing, and they helped me understand so much things that I didn't understand before. And so I think that was part of the reason that, and I know I've mentioned this before, that I would leave group and just be in tears, or on the inside, I'm sobbing. I'm not sobbing on the outside, but on the inside, I am, is
Right.
because you just gave me so much freedom to think and feel and be myself. And I don't know that I've ever had really felt that way completely before, you
Mhm.
know. So that's big. It's really
It's
big.
very big, yeah. And that's why it's so important. Like last week when we were talking about empowerment and the way that that works in the work that we do, it's huge. Just again, that piece of I've been taught not to listen to myself. I've been taught not to trust myself. I can't make it, instead of being I have been taught, it goes into I can't make good choices. I don't trust myself. And now I'm stuck. And so just the freedom of, let's give you a little bit of power back. Let's give you a little bit. And that little bit feels really good. However, sometimes that little bit feels scary. And so that little bit may be too much. So let me step away from group for a while or whatever that is and process that little bit. And then all of a sudden it makes sense. So then I might come back.
Yeah.
So you can't just force healing onto somebody in the same way that you can't force somebody to make choices that you insist they make or whatever else. And so we make it palatable in the support group setting, I think.
You do, because you give us, well, at least when I was there, and I'm sure you do it the same way now, you give a good amount of information.
Potentially.
But in the sessions, the group sessions, you would give us some really good information, but it wasn't too much. It was just enough to chew on and think about. And there were times there would be like an exercise or something with it, you know, that just really helped me grasp a little bit better. I'm not an auditory learner. I'm one that does better with visual and then hands-on. And so that really helped solidify it for me on whatever the topic was.
You know, what's funny about that is our advocates have stopped using it as frequently as we used to. We used to have this great support group book, and it would have those exercises that you're talking about. And sometimes those exercises would have 3 pages, 10 questions, 12 questions, or whatever else. And I always thought one of the best groups would be we only got to 1 or 2. Because what that did is I always looked at those questions as a let's get the party started kind of thing. Let's get the conversation going, And so I still believe that the best groups facilitate themselves. And so if that one question is what got everybody focused on what they wanted to talk about, so be it. And so that's why when I say they're palatable, because it was never too much, because it was group driven. And so if the group got through one question, they're like, oh yeah, that's great, we got enough. Well, we'll answer question number 2 next week then. But you can't put a timeline on that. Like when we're talking about healing, again, you can't put a timeline on that. You can't heal from everything just today because you've decided that now I'm in a shelter and I want to be healed. Thank goodness that you had the ability to take that step, but that doesn't mean all of that goes away just because.
Yeah.
It's a process. We had people coming to our support groups that came multiple years. And it wasn't because they needed support or help every week, but as the weeks added on to each other, it was meeting that need of, 6 months from now, oh yeah, I can work on that now.
Yeah.
And what was always so great about me using the same chapters of the books, using them over and over again, it always fascinated me with the people that would come for multiple years. Last year I answered it this way, and they would keep them. I answered it this way, and I noticed this year that's not even part of the equation anymore. I'm focused on this. And so one woman I know in particularly, she came for, I swear, 12 years to support group. And she frequently would be like, yeah, I went back and looked at that when I went home last night, and it wasn't anywhere near, I was nowhere near in the same place. And for her, it was like a way to journal her progress, because she could see that wasn't even an issue anymore. When I wrote that answer that first time, it was a horrible issue in my life, and I had no answer this time because there was no issue. So that's fantastic. Yeah, I always loved the fact that she did that.
That is so cool. I love that idea. Yeah, and that's what I had wanted to do, and it never worked out. I wanted to be one of those people that came, every week on group night, and yeah, my jobs just never cooperated with me.
Yeah. Well, the good news is we've had group on a Tuesday night forever, so
yes.
If you happen to drop by tomorrow, there's going to be a group. So
I love it. Love it. Love it. Well, let me jump back to that traumatic event that happened at work. And
Mhm.
as I was retelling my boss, and I'm, talking with my hands and all this, that's all she's doing. She's just watching my hands like this, and just, can you address that? Can you speak to that somehow? Like, um, maybe use that as an example and why not to do that, but to look the person in the eye and listen to what they're saying and not watch what's
Well,
going on.
now I will tell you, it can be challenging to talk to a person who talks with their hands if they're all over the place like that, because it is distracting. And so those are the things that do draw your eye. And so that does make it challenging. But honestly, where I'm a big proponent of active listening, and what active listening implies is that you make eye contact with the person when they're telling their story. You nod your head accordingly when there's things that you want to communicate that I agree with. When you have questions, you ask questions that reframe what the person has just said and answer it in that way. If she's watching your hand, she wasn't listening to you. She was distracted.
Okay. Okay.
And I will agree it can be distracting, but as a person who talks with their hands, my own self, I try to keep it toned down as much as I can too, because
Right. Okay. So what I was seeing was correct. She did not hear really what I was saying.
probably not.
Yeah.
Especially if she wasn't responding to what you were saying properly or whatever else, she wasn't listening.
Okay. That helps me understand that. Okay. Thank you. Um, as I'm the one who does the editing. And so as I was listening to these, as I edited the videos that we did last time on empowering, there was something that I wanted to bring up. You were talking about silence in the group,
Yes.
and where, sometimes there's just people aren't saying anything for long periods of time. And I love it that you allow that, because sometimes the topics that were brought up were hot buttons for me of real deep pain from something that I needed to process.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm also, usually when I'm quiet in a group like that, I'm thinking how that applies to me. Even if I'm not, even if it's not a hot button for me, I'm thinking, how does that apply to me? And then I'm also thinking, is that something that I really want to share with everybody in
Right.
the group?
Right.
Um, but I love that. And then later, as I moved on and I moved to a different city, and I found a group of women that I could go and be with them once a week. And it was run very similar to the way you folks do group at the crisis center. And it was a place that was just for children, helping children that have been through domestic violence. And so
Mhm.
then this group was one for moms. And I loved it. I got so much out of that group as well, because they allowed the silence. And
Yeah.
it's very necessary. Is there anything you want to add to that?
I think about that. Some people are wired that way. I'm wired that way. Like I think about, you read in my bio that I sat on our state coalition's board of directors for the number of years. The worst thing that could have ever happened to me sitting at that table, because we're talking leaders in the state who are from individual programs but come together as a coalition to make decisions for the betterment of the state.
Yeah.
So sitting at that table, it's not the crisis center that's my priority. It's the coalition that's my priority. The
Mhm.
worst thing they could ever do to me sitting at that table was propose a question, propose something and throw it out there and look to me as to be the one to speak first.
Mhm.
Because I'm wired in such a way as, you got to let me think about it for a second. Does that mean I'm not going to have an answer? You know me well enough to know I always have an answer. But if
Yeah.
it's something that requires a little bit of thought behind, well, not a little bit of thought, but requires thought behind the answer, I
Mhm.
need to think about it for a second. And
Mhm.
so there were times in the beginning of my term sitting at the coalition that would happen, and I would always be like, I got nothing. Now, if we'd go around the room and I would take in what other people were saying too, but it was me trying to process how I felt about that thing. If you'd let me be 5 or 6 out of the table at 20, I'm good.
Mhm.
Just don't make me be the first, because I have to think about that. And so I think some of us are just wired that way.
Mhm.
My dad gave me one of the biggest compliments I could possibly imagine one time, when in one of my college classes I had to have interview somebody about myself. And so I asked him to describe me in a couple of words. And you know what he said? He said, "I would describe you as the quiet, wise one." And I was like, "Really? What does that mean?" And he said exactly that. He said, "Because before you answer something big, you think about it for a minute." He said, "You don't have to think about it for days. You don't have to think about it for weeks, but you don't ever just blurt out an answer that you can't take back. When you say it, you've thought about it and you know what you want to say." And some people are just wired that way. And
Yeah.
so, I mean, hearing you talk, you're wired that way. You know, it may go into the former episodes where he talked about a little bit of the introversion that we have, you know, some of
Mhm.
that maybe. I mean, those all things may be connected, but I've never been afraid of silence, and I wish more people weren't,
Yeah.
honestly.
Mhm. I think that's one advantage that I have right now of being able to live by myself and just begin to love. I just couldn't get over it when I began to really realize how much I loved the silence in the
Yeah,
house. It was fantastic.
yeah. I got a little puppy that's not wanting to be silent right now, but
That's okay. That's okay. We love the puppy because we can picture him underneath the table nibbling on
yes.
your
He's
toes.
under the well, he's not nibbling, now he's crying a little bit because he wants me to pick him up, I think.
You can pick him up. We love seeing Teddy.
Well, come here. Of course, he wants to look at me when I say come here, so
Uh-huh. He wants you
we
to
can
pick him up, but he doesn't want you to pick him up.
right, right.
Mhm.
Yeah, we can just carry on.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you again, Becky. Appreciate it.
My pleasure, thank you.
Absolutely. And folks, remember that no matter where you are in the process, you are always free to soar.